Blues legend Willie Dixon, quote, "Everyone has the blues, but everyone's blues aren't exactly the same. And everybody don't express it the same way. They express it according to the surroundings they've been around. On the plantation, a guy would get up in the morning early. He worked hard all night, all day. He went to bed. He'd get up early in the morning. Unconsciously, he's thinking. That's the way the blues are. Unconsciously, you think about the things you would desire." This is a direct quote. Why that? That's why you hear in the morning, you hear a guy singing. He's going out to catch his muse. The blues is the truth. And if it's not the truth, it's not the blues. All right, so when a note is played on an instrument, several other frequencies are produced than the intended pitch. You don't just hear one frequency, that's called the fundamental. You also hear fractions of the pitch or main frequency. This spectrum is called the harmonic series, or overtones or partials. So if you take the first few overtones and divide or multiply by 2, you get notes that line up closely with the major scale. Or more precisely, it's the just intonation major scale. These major scale fractions tend to be simple. They're mostly even fractions of the wavelength. So they're called like mathematically simple ratios of thirds, fourths, and eighths. And the major scale reflects the fact that the major scale reflects these simple ratios is what gives it its harmonious or happy sound. The consonant and harmonious sound is due to these intervals matching the simple ratios. With dissonant or less harmonious intervals, the frequencies are closer. So dissonant intervals have less simple ratios. The major third is 5/4. So in decimal, it's 1.25, easy to count, 25, 50, 75, 125, very simple. The minor third is 19/16, which has the complex decimal of 1.1875, and is actually adjusted to be a more simple ratio of 6/5. So these dissonant intervals produce frequencies that are sounding closer to each other than the spaced out intervals. So you can kind of see this spacing of kind of like the subject and object A that you get the dissonant anxiety as they get closer. There's a kind of analogy there. And that's why progressions are usually spaced out. You jump 1 to 5, 1 to 4. You don't do chromatic progressions like 1, 2, 3. That sounds very odd and anxiety provoking. Furthermore, dissonant intervals have ratios that are irrational numbers. So physicist Hermann von Helmholtz, who specializes in acoustics, agrees that the major scale has a privileged mathematical grounding that he describes as natural, while minor scales have a cultural or expressive modification. So they're less natural, apparently. So the effect of music being harmonious or non-harmonious is more than a question of physics. This has been actually a cultural issue as well. In Plato's Republic, there is an in-depth discussion of music censorship, where the characters discuss the modes or scales that are best for raising the guardian class. Plato's Socrates argues that sad music should not be permitted, quote, dispense with dirges and laments, end quote, as well as modes described as, quote, languid, end quote. Musical complexity is a big problem that needs simplification. Not just the musical scales allowed, right? So, quote, give me only 2 modes, one stern, one pleasant, which will best represent sound, courage, and moderation, end quote. And also he talks about the range of notes. Quote, we shan't need music or song a multiplicity of strings or a wide harmonic range. We shan't therefore keep craftsmen to make instruments of many strings or wide range, end quote. So, I mean, Bruce Fink says the neurotic tries to simplify the excesses of object A into simple demand, right? And S login A to S login D. So the excesses of music are too much for the narrow role of the guardian class. And so this seems like a good plan. I think so. If you're going to have a society where people are born into or forced into an identity, you don't want the excesses of musical complexity, nor the encounter of lack in dirges and laments, right? Billie Holiday was discouraged from recording the iconic 1939 song, a song I would call a dirge, Strange Fruit, which is about the lynching of black people because it was too morbid for mainstream audiences. In medieval times, the church regulated dissonance, especially with the tritone chord, which has a minor third and a minor fifth. They labeled it Diabolus in Musica, the devil in music, which, by the way, is also a great Slayer album. Music also took on its association with sex during this time, and importantly, anxiety about sex. Bishop John of Salisbury in 1159 points to the worrying excess when he states, "When music goes too far, it can more easily occasion arousal in the loins than devotion in the mind." And unfortunately, this association has not lessened, such that in 1987, Alan Bloom attacked rock music, saying, quote, "Young people know that rock has the beat of sexual intercourse." So how many of you knew that? Doing some research here. Okay. One person.
What about 2000 crunk music?
We're getting there. Music even bothered Freud, as we know, because he didn't like anything good except. Okay, so maybe we can get to jazz now. Okay. So did Plato's argument for censorship work? Did the medieval church successfully repress dissonant chords? Well, a whole genre of dirges and laments arose from the legacy of slavery in America, the blues. So the blues progression, which is the structure of most jazz, that's the what you're talking about, returning to that. What allows the improvisation is knowing you can return. It's the blues progression, that's the core of that. There's blue notes, and the blues progression got combined with military brass marching bands of the Civil War, which is also a legacy of slavery. Those two combined to form jazz. So as the master's discourse is telling you, you now know what jazz is. So musicologist Derek Cook claims that the jazz version of scales is essentially a major scale, but its use of blue notes makes it, quote, contradict, unquote, the usual harmonious sound. So isn't this the Hegelian spirit that moves not toward greater harmony, but toward contradiction? So you might say, oh, we already had experimental music occurring before and during the rise of jazz. The Impressionist composers certainly used unusual chords and scales. However, that didn't launch a mainstream genre. Jazz's success is precisely its ties to spirit as something that emerges from a historical world and not from ivory towers and university discourse. The earlier notation of slavery and the Civil War being important to this point. So is jazz simply the contradiction to the original major scale? I want to point out that, of course, there's not an original there's no non-contradictory origin to anything, right? So there was actually, the naturalness of the major scale is actually not settled. The frequencies of the major scale, despite their mathematical consistency, remain off to the human ear. Attempts at mathematically consistent frequencies, which is called just intonation, that I mentioned earlier. You also have Pythagorean tuning and mean tone temperament. All these attempts do not have universal application. They each sound in tune only in certain keys while being dissonant in other keys. Thus, even the natural balance of the major scale needs tuning, adjusting outside of a universal standard like mathematics. So in music, we call this tempering. It makes sense that the progress in music is not towards settling the contradictions of the major scale, but increasing contradiction in jazz's incorporation of complex chords. So this is a great example. There is the occasional use of complex dissonant chords like triads, sevenths, and ninths in classical music, but in jazz these are fundamental. So you see all the sevens. You have those are seventh chords, which were rare in classical music, kind of dissonant, and now they are totally embraced in jazz. So besides the chords, as a defining trait of jazz, there's also the important use of rhythmic syncopation. So syncopation is stressing the offbeat or when a note jumps in too early. So we expect the beat to sound on the downbeat like the third of the bar, but it comes in this unexpected beats. So it comes from the Greek syncope, meaning cutting off. So or cutting short. So when people ask me what castration means, I usually tell them to listen to "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" by the Rolling Stones, because his voice is not just rhythmically syncopated, but the words are also cut off from each other. So he's like, "I can't get no," so there's like this extra cutting involved, along with him being cut off from satisfaction. So Jelly Roll Morton, one of the early pioneers of jazz, said, "My grandmother told me that devil music would surely bring my downfall." So this association with Satan from medieval times has not gone away either. The blues had already earlier indulged in the association with the devil, and it's actually a well-known characteristic of the blues music and culture to refer to the devil, like blues legend Robert Johnson selling his soul to the devil at the crossroads, and Petey Wheatstraw crediting himself as the devil's son-in-law. It's no wonder that pioneers of heavy metal, like Ozzy the Prince of Darkness Osbourne and his band Black Sabbath, started out as a rock blues band called Polka Tulk Blues Band. So during the emergence of blues, there was a strict cultural understanding that gospel singers and blues singers would stick with their genre and they shouldn't cross over. But this dialectic repeats tragedy as farce and sublates itself in the Blues Brothers film, where their criminal duo are divinely inspired to use blues music in service of God. They're a duo there too, you know. And Cornel West says the blues are spirituals for the non-religious, and especially important to prisoners. And the Blues Brothers film starts and ends with them in prison. And so there's all this stuff about assertion of agency. You're talking about, and I know you wrote about like white violence against black people, like black people who are expressing their agency, playing loud music, and how that offends. So there's a lot of that happening. With the acceptance of jazz and blues as a legitimate and not devilish part of culture, does that mean repression has gone away? Well, no. I mean, the Blues Brothers only actually features 2 blues songs that are upbeat and not actual dirges. But the call and response structure is a feature of music that you don't really see much anymore. So you have, it's emerged in different ways. So we have, folk traditions have this communal call and response, and this was eventually taken a back seat to the commodity form of the star performer, the non-castrated rock star pop idol. Call and response gets kind of reduced here to voice and instrument. So we see B.B. King, who personified his guitar with the contrasting feminine name Lucille, said the instrument is a competing voice or complementary voice in the performance. So it's interesting that he says competing before complementary. So one defining form of jazz improvisation is the voice scat singing a melody, and then an instrument will echo it with embellishments on the final line. There's like Anita O'Day at the Newport Jazz Festival is a really good example of this. And you have improvising dual soloists, such as Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Bird Parker. So this competing dual relation gets eliminated in pop music with all the instruments revolving around the master star's voice. And Yale musicologist Craig Wright says that 2 strings are difficult to perfectly tune to one note. One string doesn't have anything to compare to, while 3 strings you get a homogenization effect that covers inconsistencies. But when you just have the 2, it's actually really difficult. And it's the same with 2 singers. They'll always sound a little bit out of tune. So, so you get this kind of dual singers that repeats. I'll mention the hyperpop band that 100 Gex also has this dual voice that I find really interesting. Call and response kind of breaks the type of major scale unity and harmony that can trap ambiguous feelings into ideology and fantasy, as Zizek's well-known take on the perverse unity of Ode to Joy, which is in a major key. This can be updated to include John Lennon's Imagine, which is also in a major key. Like Jimmy Carter said, in many countries around the world, my wife and I have visited about 125 countries to hear John Lennon's song Imagine used almost equally with national anthems. And Imagine's phoniness was exposed during the COVID-19 lockdowns when there was that online celebrity performance that everyone hated. It was a time of anxiety and mourning, and we didn't need that, right? What we need is a kind of a new blues that can confront lack and a call and response that can incorporate many voices, more than one voice. We're in this conference. You're talking about part of this conference is to develop a language of suffering, to understand suffering, and I think that's something we can look to blues and jazz for, because across history you see this, from the Greek poet Pindar, who said, "What so of bliss is among men, never does it appear unmingled with woes." And he claimed music was invented for mourning, to mourn the death of Medusa. And now up to Pete, you get this now in Pete Kelly's blues, which goes, "I'm stuck with, fresh out of luck with, the blues. There's no exit. You can try, but if you're born with it, you're gonna die with it, the blues." So I think that what we need is to sing together in a way that we can have a shared lack that bonds us through the social death drive. And solidarity should remember Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy and its full title, Birth of Tragedy, from the Spirit of Music. Thank you.